Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is the last part of the talk called The Shining Through of the Divine. So it's from the Ajahn Amaro anthology of teachings, volume 3. And this book is The Way It Is, and these are talks from the winter retreat of 1988. And so this will be the last reading today of this winter retreat. So there's not a lot left of this talk, but probably enough to fill up our time together with. So we had already looked at the first 3 Brahma Viharas, Metta, Karuna, Mudita, and then the last part is on Upekkha. Then Upekkha, equanimity, serenity. To be able to abide in serenity of the mind, we're not going around looking for beautiful things to find delight in, because there's no self. You respond to beauty with joy, but it's not something that you look for or seek as a person anymore. So the ordinariness of life is upekkha, is serenity. It's about having peacefulness with the pains and aches of the aging process and separation from the loved. All this is the realization of upekkha, of serenity. Upekkha doesn't mean indifference. Sometimes it's translated as indifference, quote unquote, but it actually means serenity when things are ugly, unpleasant, or ordinary. If you follow the asubha practices, noticing, paying attention to the unbeautiful, the not beautiful, you begin to create upekkha, or equanimity, serenity. There was a hospital in Bangkok which received all the murder victims and violent deaths, corpses found in the canals and things like that. If you went in on a Monday, they would have a collection from the weekend, a variety of gruesome, macabre objects that would first give you a strong feeling of revulsion. You'd go in and say, yuck, let me out of here. Because we don't generally like to look at human bodies that have been butchered and mangled and are in a state of decay. Such things are what civilized society always keeps away from. We have institutions to take care of them, so they never have to meet our attention. But if one meditates on these things, the result is actually equanimity or serenity. If you get over the initial aversion, horror and negativity towards a rotting human corpse or a human corpse that's been cut up in an autopsy, the result is equanimity, a tremendous peacefulness and serenity. Not depression, not aversion. When there's no self, one can abide in a state of serenity. If there's self, then we say, I hate it, I don't like it, take it away, I can't stand it, I can't bear this, it's foul, it's disgusting. But when there's equanimity, actually, there's no self. So one is not making problems about the process of living and the way things move and change and go from beauty to decay. With mudita, you find joy in the beauty, and when the beauty fades, there's equanimity rather than sorrow. So once again, Luang Por is using the word serenity over and over as a translation for upekkha, which is a word in English that gives a greater quality of brightness or sanctity, spaciousness, equanimity, or indifference. Sometimes it is translated that way, and sometimes to be accurate in the teachings, the word upekkha is deliberately used to mean indifference, like a not caring, like the sort of a very unskillful attitude. But it's a minority of times that it's used in that way, as far as I'm aware. And generally it's referring to this great brightness, this spacious serenity of the heart, this ability to be untroubled or unshaken by the agitations of the world. So this description of visiting the autopsies in the police hospital in Bangkok, that's something that the Sangha members would regularly do. I went there once or twice. And we would go on a Monday morning, and because it's a Buddhist country in the main part, and they're familiar with the practice of asubha kammatthana, the reflection on the not beautiful or the patikula sanya, the sort of disgusting or unattractive, loathsome nature of the body. Then the hospital is quite open, supportive of monastics coming to be present at those autopsies. And so they would be, because over the weekend the doctors wouldn't be there until Monday morning, so that's why it was the bodies would accumulate over the weekend from various accidents or being found, and then there would generally be a larger number that they were dealing with on a Monday. So it's a very good opportunity. Many people of us, particularly in the West, have never see a dead body, or even if we do, it might be at a funeral where the body's been put in a nice set of clothes and made up to look as though they're just sleeping. Or as Ajahn Sujito memorably put it, he said, even when you're in a coffin, they dress you up like you're on your way to a party. So many of us never see a dead body, and so that side of life is something that is kept away from us in the main part. And some cultures in the West, they have a tradition of having a wake, and the body is there in an open coffin in the middle of a group of people. But in many countries, bodies are whisked away, and you don't even have funerals nowadays. You have a celebration of life rather than a funeral, and local conventions or systems, they can vary a lot. And some places you're not actually allowed to be there when they put the body into the coffin in the ground and start putting earth onto the coffin, because the earth hitting the coffin is taken to be something that's traumatic. And so that, I remember one Sangha member who went to a funeral, and she was a very forthright person, and she said, "I want to be there when I want to stay here until they put the earth on the coffin." And the funeral director said, "We can't put any earth in until you go, madam." She said, "No, I'm not going." "Well, we're not putting anything we're not putting any earth in until you go. That's the law." And so she was astonished, but in that particular area, then it was the public had to be away. Even just the sound of the earth hitting the coffin was taken to be something that was sort of invasive or intrusive or unbearable. So one of the interesting things I've shared a few times in the past, when I went to the autopsies at the police hospital, Sirirat Hospital, I think it's called, in Bangkok. It was interesting to me because I did a university degree in physiology, so I'd been around dead human body parts in the past. I hadn't actually been in a whole sort of anatomical dissection, but I'd certainly been around, had human brains and such like that we'd worked on. But one of the really interesting things to me that was being in that and being around, because one of the things that you don't get from hearing the words or thinking of the ideas is the smell. And most animals have a particularly instinctual negative reaction to the smell of their own dead. So that for some reason your own species has a particular smell. So I think it's a very basic instinctual protection of, like, one of your team didn't make it, get out, it's dangerous here, go now. So that say a dead human would always smell worse, or have an intrinsically more repellent smell than, say, a dead cat or a horse or something of that nature. So that your own species is particularly shocking on a kind of non-rational level, on a very instinctual, powerful level. So the smell of a dead body is particularly impactful, and you can't really prepare for that. But again, it is a meditation exercise, and very sort of challenging, but also illuminating. And if you, as Luang Por is saying here, if you really give yourself to it and you just pay attention, the result of it is a great peacefulness, as a kind of calm that is there after the sense of going through the wave of revulsion or sort of instinctual reaction of like, oh, I don't want to be here. Often, if that's passed through, then there's a great peacefulness, a sense of inner quietness. For some people, it's the instinctual reactions are just too strong. I remember Ajahn Chandako wrote it was either a Dhamma talk he gave, where he wrote an article about going to these autopsies and how. And he was a sort of very strong-minded and independent, skilled, experienced practitioner, and thought that he was sort of ready for this kind of a practice, and that he wouldn't be that challenged by it. But he said it wasn't even, if I remember correctly, what he wrote. He said it wasn't even revulsion. It was just something in him just shut down and said no. And he could feel his consciousness just contracting, just kind of down to a single point, and then just switched off, and he fainted. He just, like, something said, no, not acceptable. I mean, not even in those words, but just literally the whole system closing down, and he blacked out. And so that, which is, again, I feel is instructive and helpful to see, it's not just something that the thinking mind can work with or override, but we're working with very powerful natural forces of the mind, and the Buddha encouraged this kind of practice in order to get to know these things, like with attraction to others and aversion, and to get to know the whole field of experience that is part of the living system that we embody. And by drawing close to that and using these kind of situations, it can be very instructive, very illuminating and liberating. One of the things that I've often shared about this that was surprising to me was that it was one of the things that really hit me, more than just sort of the bodies being cut up or the sort of skin being peeled off or organs being taken out and weighed and such like, was that it was the kind of tiny details, because the bodies were mostly just sort of as they had arrived, so they were still sort of wearing the clothes that they had when they had an accident or whatever, they had the illness that they died of or whatever. Mostly it was accidents or bodies that were fished out of the canal, but that were there. And what really struck me was that when you looked at the body lying there on the slab, that because most of them were sudden deaths from a trauma or accident of some kind, was that really the powerful anicca sanya of, when that lad put that T-shirt on that morning, he didn't know that was the last time he'd ever put a shirt on. When that woman painted her fingernails, she didn't know that was the last time she'd ever paint her nails before she, and you could. They gave us a bit of a story. This person, fell off the back of a motorbike, or this fellow was working on a construction site and he got hit by a piece of rebar on the head, and so on. And that was, in a way, that was something that touched me as much, if not more, than the actual sort of construction of the body. That sense of you don't know when it's going to be your last moment, and when you paint your nails, or you put that shirt on, or you buckle that belt, that might be the last time you ever do that. And it was interesting. It was not something I was expecting at all, but that basically the quality of uncertainty of that life can just blink out in a finger snap, and so that it encourages us to be really attentive to what we're doing with each moment, and also not taking things for granted, that this very act that we're a part of now, this very act that we're performing now, this can be your last moment in the human world, right now, just even before I get to the end of the chapter, it can go. And so that was, it really struck me, and stayed with me, that kind of casualness which we just go about our everyday activities, putting on our sandals. Where did I leave my hat? I got to get to the sala. It's nearly time for the meal. In that feeling of always being in the middle of things, or on the way to something, or I'll just do this, or I've got this and this and this on my to-do list, and it's like, really? So that I found that the perception of that, say those encounters in the pathology lab, with the autopsies, it really strengthened that for me. Really, ever since that sense of don't be complacent, don't take it for granted. Yes, you think you're on the way to somewhere, but don't take it for granted that you'll get there, or that this event will happen, or that conversation will take place, or this work will get done, and that there's both a challenge and a refreshing quality in that. So unfortunately, in the West, going to autopsies is not something that's doable. It's been looked into a few times, but the relationship of religious figures going into an autopsy for meditation purposes is not something that most medical facilities in the West are at all supportive of. We've been in certain places. You'd find a doctor who was like a Sri Lankan or a Thai or a Burmese doctor, and they say, I can get you in, or I'll find, I'll get permission. But then it gets, when it's been tried in the past, or people have made those inquiries, it's been difficult for them as well, and their bosses go, what? Buddhist monks in a pathology lab? Why? That's kind of weird. Is it a death cult or what? And so that they don't really have that relationship with contemplating death in the same kind of a way. So it's the sort of thing that if you're in a Buddhist country like Thailand, then it's not difficult to arrange. But if you're somewhere in the West, then it's not proved doable. So any questions, thoughts, reflections? If you could use the microphone.
Just a quick comment. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Ajahn Chittapala was teaching a weekend, creative weekend, something like that, in the retreat center, and she got a heart from a pig, I think it was, a heart, and I think there was like Asuba was part of the weekend or something, and I had a chance. She showed it to me, and I had not really, worked with animal organs much. So just touching it and pressing it and getting a sense of the texture. I tend to do a Suba meditation, so I found it extremely helpful just to have maybe a few seconds to get a bit of more of a felt sense of what this is about, even if it was from an animal. I found it quite helpful.
What was the theme for the creative weekend? Pig hearts I have known, or
I think just body contemplation.
Yeah, very good, very good. That's it's a helpful way to approach things. Upekkha is actually, there's a typo there. Upekkha is actually the ability not to follow aversion or be carried away when you see beautiful things. So we're not just running around trying to rejoice in beauty or trying to feel karuna for every unfortunate creature. We can let ourselves wait when there's nothing much happening. With upekkha, one doesn't have to seek something to be happy about or some cause to fight for or engage in the compulsive activity. That's another great problem for modern humanity. We try to use up our need for restless activity in good causes. We are always involved in activities because there's no upekkha. Traditionally, the Brahmaviharas are considered as Lokiya Dhamma, mundane Dhamma. not the transcendent or Lokuttara Dhamma. Because of the way the mind tends to think, the view arises that they're not worth bothering with. Lokuttara Dhamma are the important ones. You don't pay much attention to the Lokiya Dhammas. But with mindfulness, you're with the relationship of the Lokiya to the Lokuttara. So you're paying attention to the relationship of the Lokiya, the worldly, to the Lokuttara, the transcendent. We relate on the Lokiya Dhamma level through the Brahma Viharas, Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekkha. When there's no self, when there's no ignorance conditioning the mental formations, then there's the way of things, the Lokiya Dhammas. But we're not asking mudita to be a permanent experience. We're not expecting to have a continuous, absolute, eternal experience of rejoicing and joy in our lives, because we're not attached to that as a viewpoint. So the Brahma Viharas represent a spontaneous response to the experience of birth and consciousness when there's no self. They're a spontaneous response from selflessness, from anatta, rather than an impulsive reaction from desire. There's a difference between a spontaneous response to wisdom and mindfulness and an impulsive reaction to desire. The difference lies in that view of a self. In the self-view, one is still grasping, just reacting impulsively with desire to life's impingements and experiences. When there's no more ignorance, there's spontaneity. That's what spontaneity is. There's no self in it. It's just a more and more natural way to respond to beauty, truth and virtue, or to pain and misery, to winter, spring, summer and autumn, to the fortunate beings or the unfortunate ones, and even to the waiting, holding your cup of tea, looking out of the window at the rain. So there's a few little points here. The upekkha doesn't have to seek something or to be happy about or some cause to fight for. So a few days ago we were talking about how the mind, we get a sense of being, that sense of liveliness, of life and value and meaning from being engaged with things. It can be something that we're excited about, something that we're irritated by, something that we're frightened of, something we've got an opinion about, something that we're regretting, something we're nostalgic for. You name it. As I was saying at that part of the reading, it's really not the thing that you're excited about, or the thing that you're regretting, or the thing that you're angry with, or the thing that you're worried about. Yeah, it's the meanness, the me feeling, the I, me, mine feeling, the ahankara, mamankara, the I making and mind making. That's what I would say is the driving force. And the mind picks up something to be angry with, something to be excited about, something to be worried about, something to have a doubt about, something to regret, something to be nostalgic about. It picks it up and inflates it because of the sense of defined being that comes from that. And I know that sometimes when I talk in that way, people sometimes find that objectionable. They don't like that because they no. This is my heart was really broken and I can never forgive that person for how they treated me. It's not just a memory, Ajahn. There's something more to it. Or that this is a real problem. I really did something wrong. I can't be forgiven for that. Or no, this is something that's really upsetting in the way the government does things, and we really have to. We can't be peaceful. We've got to object. We've got to protest. And so it can seem that the particular issue that the mind has latched onto, again, with all due respect to people's experience, from my own perspective on life, you can see how the mind latches onto a particular event, pleasant, painful, neutral, personal, public, and says, yes, that's it, that's a big thing. And then the mind buys into that, and then it becomes the thing. It becomes this massive part of your life. And you don't have to look too far around the society or around your family or the people around you to see how that works, and even just in our own lives as well, naturally, to see that we take something and make a huge issue of it. And then if we don't get a perspective on that, then we're really born into it. I remember my father used to write a column, a page for a dog magazine called Dog World, and the editor of it was a woman called Ferelith Hamilton, and she. So it was a fairly, it's a magazine about dogs. It's not a kind of real big seller, and it's not incredibly popular. But so they sort of potted along as a little dog magazine, and then Ferelith Fefi Hamilton, that was her nickname, Fefi. She got married to a fellow who had formerly been the editor of the News of the World, which is a sort of major sort of shock horror tabloid newspaper. Which had in its heyday it would sell about 7 million copies every Sunday. So it was a big. I don't know if it's still in print, but anyway, this fellow. Stafford Summerfield was his name, I believe, if I remember correctly. He and Fefi Hamilton got married, and so then he wasn't in the dog business, but he had his influence on the editor. And I remember my father telling me how with the Stafford Summerfield's influence on the magazine, he said it was amazing how they would just get sort of trickles of news or little events that happened in different parts of the country, some kind of a meeting of a local dog club up some in the north of Scotland, or an argument that happened between people on a committee in Birmingham, or a dog show that got cancelled in Aberystwyth or whatever, and take a little sort of one-line snippet of news. And he said it's amazing. He can just take one little tiny kind of comment from a committee meeting, or a short, very unexciting reference to a particular event, and he would be able to make it like a half-a-page story, or a whole sort of banner headlines on the front page of this particular issue. And I remember my dad saying, it's extraordinary. I don't know how he does that, but it's like there's nothing much going on, but he can put it on the front page and make you really interested to read it. And it's a kind of a whole career in tabloid journalism, and so I didn't really think of much about it at the time, but it comes to mind now how that's how our minds work. We take a little snippet of news, something that happened in our life, a sort of an event that when we were a college student, or some argument with our sister or our brother, or a something that you got a prize for, or some argument you had with an Ajahn in a different monastery, or someone that you were really inspired by and thought was the most wonderful person, and the mind takes hold of that, and then next thing you know, that one little snippet, a tiny piece of news or a small fact, whoomph, it's a banner headline on the front page, and oh my goodness, look at that. And so, again, I'm not trying to belittle people's experience or say, that our particular achievements or crises or significant things in our lives are totally to be dismissed. But I feel it's really helpful to see how we get a sense of being from those kind of contacts. And because the attention goes to the thing that's regrettable, that's irritating, that's exciting, that is feeding the sense of nostalgia. The attention goes to the object, so it has to sort of turn it right around and look back and say, what's happening on the subject side? What's the feeling of identity that comes from that? And I've said this over and over again, but it doesn't have to be pleasant. We can recreate painful situations again and again and again that we, on the surface level, we might think, why do I keep doing that? That's so awful. I feel so bad when I do that, or I really want to give that up. And I feel so awful. I feel so so much regret and self-criticism. And so I really hate this habit that I have. But we don't hate it because we keep doing it. And it's because of, again, not getting into too much pop psychology, but often it's the sense of identity, that me who's done something wrong, me who's a failure, me who's hurt somebody's feelings, me who's let somebody down, that even though it's painful, the sense of me that comes from it is something that is profoundly desirable, that sense of I am, the me-ness. So we often keep recreating painful situations when on the surface level we say, that's ridiculous, I don't want to do that anymore. But we keep recreating it because of the sense of being that comes from that. Does that make sense? Has anyone had that same kind of experience? Say no if you haven't. But I feel it's getting to know how bhava tanha works, that sense of defined being, and then going to upekkha, then that upekkha is in a way leading into that an openness to undefined being, to being completely at ease without that sense of I and me and mine being fed or being fueled in any way. And as Luang Por puts it here, with upekkha one doesn't have to seek something to be happy about or some cause to fight for or engage in the compulsive activity. That's another great problem for modern humanity. We try to use up our need for restless activity in good causes. We are always involved in activities because there's no upekkha. We want to be doing something, not because, caring for others and wanting to be a useful member of society and being helpful is part of it, but often the need for me to be someone who's doing something is like, oh look, there's an excuse, I can be helpful, yes! And I'm not, again, not belittling good works and acting in unselfish and kind ways, but as I've often quoted, there's in C.S. Lewis's book, The Screwtape Letters, which is a series of letters between a demon and his nephew, who's sort of learning the ropes of how to be involved in demonic activity down in the world, and it's sort of it's called the sort of letters of advice between these two demons, and so in one of the descriptions that C.S. Lewis makes, he said she was describing a particular person. She was always inclined to be as helpful as she could to others, and the others had about them the look of the hunted. So that it's like, oh, somebody I can help. I'm so kind of identified with doing good works, and that's who I am. That then, oh look, somebody who can be helped. Yes, and in that, the person who is being helped, there isn't actually an empathy with that being. It's more like you can play a role in my need to be a helpful person. You're a kind of bit player in my self development or my self establishment program. A lot of good gets done because of people wanting to be identified as being helpful and good people. So that there are good outcomes from that. But I feel it's really important to look at that sense of compulsiveness. I've got to be doing this. I should be. I must be. I have to. And seeing that what drives a lot of that is that sense of defined being, me being this kind of a person who does this kind of thing, and just leaving things alone, letting there be spaciousness. Not, as Luang Por puts it, doesn't have to seek for something to be happy about or a cause to fight for. Doesn't mean that you don't care or that you're just going numb and switching off. It's not a numbness, but it's letting go of that, that dis-ease with space, with silence, with undefined being, and being able to open the heart to that. And again, the upekkha, genuine upekkha, is a great brightness of heart. So it's not just an emotional flatness, but it's a brightness of heart that it is there when we allow ourselves to notice neutral feeling and no thing to do, therefore don't do anything. Can open the heart to that, and that quality of upekkha is an entry point, I feel, and a skillful way of developing that letting go of bhavatanha, that desire for defined being, in an extremely skillful way. The opposite of that is vibhavatanha. That is the sort of numbing, switching off, wanting to not feel. But upekkha is not that annihilation or switching off or not caring. It's a total caring, but without that necessitating some kind of compulsive activity and engagement. Your worth or your value or your sense of meaning is not defined by what you're doing. And having to fill up the space of your life with some activity, but you can not do, if that's appropriate, and not engage, not pick things up, and there not being any sense of your time is being wasted, or that's of no value or of no meaning, because that upekkha, that equanimity, that ease of heart is really opening up the door to that realization of Dhamma, the kind of here and now perfection of Dhamma. So any questions, thoughts, reflections? Anything need to be said? Yes, Eric and Michael?
Thanks, Ajahn. I was wondering about if we use an object in the body as a meditation object, let's say to develop concentration, versus if we use Ajahn Sumedho's kind of noticing space.
Say that again.
Noticing space or contemplating space.
Noticing space. I thought you said nose in space. Interesting method. Well, it's kind of mindfulness of breathing at the nose. Yeah. Carry on. Sorry.
If those types of contemplations, considering those as one sort of category, and then as a third category, a kind of a broad awareness, inclusive awareness that Ajahn Sumedho or yourself or a lot of teachers recommend. If sometimes the broad awareness isn't necessarily cutting it, it's that 50% of the time when the letting go isn't happening. Is that a good time then to shift over to contemplations of particular nature, like concentration or contemplating space, that kind of thing?
Well, it's important to base our practice on the results of what we do, and so that if you're working with the mind in a particular way or using a particular method, then it's a balancing act. Like if you have a particular goal in mind, or you the last 2 or 3 sessions and you use that approach, that method, then you had a particular result, and you thought, well, that's good, I want that result to happen again. And then you have another meditation period, and you go, oh, that didn't work, okay, scrap that. And then that's, you're sort of abandoning that particular vehicle with just because one particular sitting didn't produce the results that you like. So it's probably sensible not to just drop some particular approach just because you didn't get a certain result, but to carry it through and to investigate. Oh, okay, well, the last 3 or 4 times it's gone in a different way, or there's been different results. I wonder what's the cause of that, or where's that coming from? So you stick with it for a time, see what the results are, and then if you realise, no, this somehow this has changed, I can't really use that in the same way, so things have shifted, so let's try something else. So that you're giving it a bit of time to work with it, and then saying, okay, well, that was appropriate, because it's very like the changing of the weather. Okay, it was really cold, and so whenever you go out, you make sure you got a hat and make a jacket and have your socks on, because it's going to get cold. And then you have a beautiful warm day like today, and say, oh my goodness, don't need that jacket anymore. Okay, socks off. Yeah, and it's dressing for warm, bright spring day. Okay, so then you adapt what you're wearing according to what the weather's doing. Apparently snow is forecast for next week. Someone told me today that it was 21 degrees today, next Wednesday it's going to be snow. Who knows? But if you just keep a balance of not just changing on a very sort of impulsive way, like, oh, that's not working, let's try this. And so then not following things through. It's good to stay with things for a time, give the mind an opportunity to be in slightly different moods or slightly different circumstances. And say, okay, well, that 6 months ago that really worked well. Last month that seemed to work really well, but something's shifted, something's changed. So let's try a different approach, and then just seeing what the results are. Okay, well that was really difficult. That was a challenge. That wasn't easy to do. But yeah, it feels like it might be beneficial. So let's just stick with this for a time and carry on with that. So as you've heard me say many times, I really encourage an experimental, investigative kind of approach, and that you're having that kind of active inquiry. And just because you decided, I want to do this practice or this is a good thing, don't assume that that's true. Don't take it for granted, but rather try things out, see what the result is, and then be guided by that. Okay, so the last part. So upekkha is a more natural way to respond to beauty, truth and virtue, or to pain and misery, or to winter, spring, summer and autumn, to the fortunate beings or the unfortunate ones, and even to the waiting, holding your cup of tea, looking out of the window at the rain. This is just a contemplation of what divinity is. If you reflect on the instinctive nature, the earthbound body, its sexual desires, its reproductive abilities, survival, eating, drinking, sleeping, all these basic instinctive necessities, there's nothing bad about them. They're just the way a form like this survives. It has to reproduce itself. In fact, human beings are becoming too good at reproducing themselves. It's rather frightening. How many billions is the world population? 6 billion and rising on this planet. This was 1988, so we're now, I think, 7.4 billion, I think, is the current number. So that's continuing to increase. How many billions is the world population? 6 billion and rising on this planet. And if they were all just animals, just like animals, just operating out of instinct, they would be several billion selfish, undeveloped, neurotic, screwed-up human beings. It's terribly frightening. Or take it to the opposite extreme. Several billion enlightened human beings. Now, that might not be so bad. Several billion enlightened human beings rather than several billion ignorant, selfish human beings. Several billion human beings who can manifest the divine in their daily lives through metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. That doesn't sound so bad. It sounds rather nice. But several billion human beings manifesting greed, hatred and delusion is a pretty grim picture. Yet we don't have the right to comment on them. This one here, this is what we have. This is what we can work on. Don't worry about the others. This is what you can develop through reflection and through meditation. So Luang Por is very fond of thinking on a grand scale, and to have a broad view of the world and how things work, and but I think it's also in this it's important, significant to recognize that the nature of this physical system, this living system, the earthbound body, its sexual desires, reproductive abilities, survival, eating, drinking, sleeping, all these basic instinctive necessities, there's nothing bad about them. They're just the way a form like this survives. So that's very, very much in accord with Luang Por Cha's teaching. It's not demonizing the functions of the body and the feelings of fear or aggression or selfishness, just understanding these as part of the natural system, but also recognizing just because something's natural doesn't mean to say that it's useful or helpful. Like, anger is part of nature, violence is part of nature, but if it's followed, then there's painful and destructive consequences. But the part of the principle of loving kindness, as we were talking about before, and that quality of acceptance is that this is part of the natural order. Just because you don't have to hate it or fear it, or reject it or blame it. Sexual desire, or anger, possessiveness, greed, selfishness, they're all natural, they're all part of the natural order, but so the skill is in not taking them personally, like I'm a terrible person because I'm selfish, or I'm angry, or I'm lazy, greedy, but seeing, well, these are part of nature. If those impulses are followed, then there'll be painful consequences. If the other wholesome qualities of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, serenity, if they are followed, then there'll be beneficial and liberating effects from that. If there's the choice is made to act on the basis of kindness, on honesty, based on simplicity, harmlessness, and so on, then those are also natural. They're also part of the natural order. If they are followed, then there'll be peaceful, benevolent, easeful consequences. So that the kind of not hating or fearing or demonizing the unwholesome, the unskillful, but recognizing, these are part of nature, but we don't have to follow them. We don't have to hate, fear, anger, and jealousy, and greed, and so on. We don't have to try to sort of destroy them or wipe them out, but rather recognizing if they're not taken personally, if they're seen as part of the living system, then there's a way that we can recognize that, know that. Yes, this is a selfish feeling, a lazy feeling, an angry feeling, a what about me feeling. It's like, that's natural enough. But our training and what brings us here to a place like Amaravati to live according to the precepts and to try and cultivate the wholesome qualities and let go of the unwholesome qualities, it's important we see these as part of what we are, the fabric of this life that we're born into. But we can make choices, that moment by moment choice is possible. And that's really that's the key to liberation, is the fact that the mind can be aware of the possibilities of action and attitude, and that which is skillful can be chosen, that which is unskillful can be left aside. And that if we see things in terms of Dhamma, in terms of nature, rather than taking it personally, then that makes it easier to let go of the unwholesome, and to not out of suppression or fear or aversion or repression, but just, that's going to lead to a painful result, let it go, just don't pick it up. This is going to lead to a beneficial result, this is going to be helpful, pick it up, follow that, support it. So that then the basis of the practice is an attunement to Dhamma, to nature, and you're not feeding those negative or destructive aspects of this life by fear and suppression and rejection. Because if you want to push things away or want to wipe things out, or like I was quoting Alexander Solzhenitsyn, if only all evil was just confined to one particular group, and then we could wipe out that group of people, and then all evil would be gone. But the line between good and evil is a line that goes down the middle of every human heart, so that it's, I feel, a very insightful way of describing things, and that if we see that, these bodies, these minds, they're capable of generating the wholesome, the unwholesome, the neutral, and that spiritual practice, this training we have, is helping us to see those are all part of the natural order, but they have different effects. There's different results that follow with those different qualities, and that we learn to make those choices, to recognize the unwholesome and restrain it, to if it's arisen, to let it go, to cultivate the wholesome, and if it's arisen, to maintain it in being. And then we see the results of those choices, and the positive, beneficial, liberating quality of those results is exactly what guides us in terms of what was going to be helpful, action and speech and attitude. Any final comments, questions, thoughts? Gaspar.
Thank you, Ajahn. Well, I just wanted to use this opportunity to express my gratitude for all these sessions. It's been an amazing privilege to participate in these readings in addition to other teaching activities. I've learned a lot, definitely super useful. And thank you again for your diligent offering of all these considerations and for the opportunity to ask questions. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you.
My pleasure. So we managed to, that was the second to last talk in the book, The Way It Is. There's one more that we didn't get to, but we did through this winter retreat. We pretty much did the whole of the book, The Way It Is. The last one is a time to love. So there's no time to love. Not enough time for a time to love, but that's the way it is. Pun intended. So any last comments, thoughts, reflections? Yes, sister. You could use the microphone.
Thank you, Ajahn. I'm asking a different question away from the Upeka. And how to cultivate the parami of determination so that when we face a difficulty, the mind won't wobble. We always say, okay, we make a commitment to the holy life and we are going to stick with it.
So adhitthana is the Pali word for determination, resolution. Well, I think you're in the right place if you want to cultivate resolution. It's like it's a quality that needs to be informed by wisdom. You can make stupid determinations that are sort of unrealistic. That sort of you make resolutions that are sort of beyond your human capacity, or are going to cause conflict or difficulty between you and the people around you. So the resolutions that we make need to be skillfully considered and thought through. But the quality of adhitthana, it's interesting that the other day we were mentioning the Gosinga Sutta, this beautiful moonlit night in the forest when the various enlightened terrors gathered together and talked about what kind of a monk would illuminate the forest on a beautiful night. And then each one of them talks about their own particular speciality, so that Venerable Ananda talks about one who's heard the teachings and remembered all the teachings. Mahamoggallana talks about one who's developed all the psychic powers. Mahakassapa talks about one who's practices all the dhutangas. And I think Venerable Revata talks about one who's thoroughly accomplished in a meditation. Anyway, at the end of that sutta, they go to see, well, let's go, they decide, let's go to see the Master and ask the Blessed One what he would say to this question. And it's one of the few places where the Buddha, in a sense, talks about his own character. So each one of them in that sutta has quite kind of charmingly described their own particular strong suit, their own major theme of their own practice, or what they're most known for. And so when they ask the Buddha, what kind of a monk do you think would illuminate the forest on a night like this? In the same theme, he talks about what's most important for him, and he talks about resolution, determination. He says, is the kind of monk who would sit down and say, I will not move from this spot. My bones can turn to dust, my blood can dry up, but I will not move from this spot until full and complete enlightenment has been realized. So when he, referring to his own character, he points to adhitthana, a resolution, which is kind of interesting. That's what, of all the many, many, many things he could have referred to in his extraordinary spiritual attributes, in that context, that's what he names. So I do feel that's significant. And if you think of the career of a bodhisattva, then it's a lot around resolution. It's like, I've made this determination, I'm going to stick with it, and no matter how many ups and downs or how difficult or how challenging, I'm not going to waver from my commitment. Though it's like any kind of strength, you can't develop that strength just by having an idea about it. It's like if you wanted to be fit, and you say, I'd like to be strong enough to walk for 15 or 20 miles in a day. You can't just sit in your room and think that and have it happen. You can't read a book about it. No, you've got to get on your feet and go and develop those strengths, because it can't happen without that. So in exactly the same way, adhitthana, resolution, is developed by those kind of tests, testing yourself and being patient, being resolute in many and various ways. So we take resolutions to within the scope of what's possible in the monastic life, like I will get up as soon as I wake up every morning, or I will do my best to be on time for every meditation sitting. And so that you then put things that are quite wholesome, quite skillful, put them in place, and then take it seriously. The negative side of adhitthana is you can turn yourself into a neurotic wreck and just be worried or self-critical that you only made it 364 days, you made it to the morning meditation in time, and one day you didn't make it. Oh, I'm a terrible person, I failed, I broke my adhitthana. And so the negative side of that, so that's why adhitthana has to be developed with a strong element of wisdom, panya, involved as well. But it's the way that resolution is developed is through it being tested by feeling lazy or I can't be bothered, or what about me, or not today. And so it's not like you're looking for trouble or you're wanting to cause yourself pain, but it's like developing physical fitness. That you will only get fit if you put in the miles. It won't happen any other way. And so developing resolution, adhitthana, it's like it won't develop unless it's tested by the feelings of greediness or laziness or selfishness or fear or desire, and then learning to work with that. So and in lay life, there's say commitment to your job. You've got a contract. You're supposed to show up on time for work. A certain amount of work you're supposed to do. You're supposed to put your heart into the work you're doing. Or marriage. That you're making a commitment to another person and being faithful to that relationship, and that you might be attracted to other people, but I'm married. I'm that person's attractive, but I'm not married to that person. So no, it's not in the scope. Or that you with the working world, it's like, yeah, I've got a job and it's part of my contract, but I can't be bothered to go to work today. I'll pull a sickie, as they say. And so then those are the temptations or the kind of impulses, greed or laziness, fear, desire, and so on. And then developing adhitthana is to that capacity to say no. That not out of aversion or anxiety, but just no. I've made this resolution. I feel this is a skillful thing to do. I'm going to be faithful to my commitment. To be sincere. And So that then there's a strength that's being developed without, and again, like with most aspects of the practice, it works best with as little self-view as possible. That, I should be this way, I shouldn't be that way, I promised I would, and I'm a terrible person because I haven't. The more selfing that happens around it, then the more obstructive and destructive those things get. So sometimes an Ajahn will, if someone wants to take on some kind of a practice, or they've made a resolution, and the Ajahn will say, no, don't do that. It's like, no. And that's part of the reason in our training, and Ajahn Chah would always encourage that for junior people, that they would have to have permission from the Ajahn if they took on some kind of particular practice. As a special ascetic practice or as an adhitthana, so that you get a bit of feedback as to whether it's practical or doable, or whether you're going to, or how your mind is handling it. So that the less self-view there is involved, and the more there is it's coming from a very sort of skillful and noble motivation, really based in Dhamma, then those tests do genuinely develop strength. So that when the Buddha said, I'm going to sit down under this tree and my bones can turn to dust and my blood can dry up, but I'm not going to move, he also knew that he was a person of exceptional paramita. And he just had the 5 significant dreams that foretold that he was on the verge of realizing full and complete enlightenment, or that there were these very powerful symbolic dreams that he had, and he knew that he was a really accomplished meditator because of the feedback, the praise he got from Alara Kalama and Uddaka Ramaputta. So it wasn't a vain, unfounded aspiration. It had a basis. In one of Luang Por Sumedho's Dhamma talks, he said he was in one monastery where a monk had made that same kind of adhitthana. I'm going to go into this kuti, I'm not going to come out of this kuti until I reach full and complete enlightenment. And he went crazy. He literally had to was carted out and taken to the mental hospital because there wasn't the foundation, there wasn't the basis. They had the kind of aspiration, the interest to realize full and complete enlightenment, but the backup wasn't there. The paramita was not developed sufficiently. So that Luang Por Sumedho he was very good at making these things very simple and straightforward. So don't make Superman or Wonder Woman resolutions if you're not Wonder Woman. It's like, measure what you're capable of. If you're not an Olympic grade athlete, don't set yourself Olympic standards. Be discerning and look at what you're capable of, and so you develop that kind of resolution and strength through stretching yourself, through testing but if it's coming from an intuitive and wise motivation, rather than just some kind of an inspired idea, or you think, wow, this is amazing, this is incredible, look what this monk did, and I'm going to do that too, and then you go crazy, or you feel like you're such a failure. Oh, I can't do it, I'm such an idiot, and then you talk with your friends and you realize that you set a totally absurd standard for yourself. It's like completely impossible to reach that. Then you realize, I was asking too much of myself. That was really impractical and impossible. So getting feedback from a teacher, or just drawing on your own intuitive wisdom, is actually part of the basis of Luang Por Chah's training. Was similarly when he had the dialogue with Luang Por Man, and he'd been reading the Visuddhimagga, and he'd been a monk about 6 or 7 years, 7 or 8 years, and he was really sincere and trying to practice in as good a way as he could. And when he spoke to Luang Por Man, he said, "I've studied the Visuddhimagga, And this is more than what a human being can do. I've really put my heart into this, but you can't live this way. This is too demanding. No human being can do this. I realize there are other people who are more sort of competent or skilled than me, but he said, I've really put my heart and full scale effort into this. You can't live this way. It's impossible. And then apparently Luang Por Mun said, you have to bear in mind, all of this came from one mind. All of this came from the mind. Just bring it back to your mind, and use the standards of Hiri and Ottappa as your measure, and so that that basically keep it simple. Ajahn Chah was focusing on all of the detail, particularly in the Sila and the Samadhi sections, I think, of the Visuddhimagga, and so trying to follow all of those standards, it's like physically impossible. And so the advice from the teacher was just bring it back to your own intuitive sense. And so I feel that kind of self-inquiry, as well as getting the inquiry from your companions in the holy life, saying, I'm thinking of making this resolution, or I really want to develop more commitment around X, Y, or Z. What do you think? And get the feedback from your friends and see what they say. Okay, so I think that's enough